Hey guys, it's Ellie. Welcome back to Bite-Sized Book of Mormon. I'm glad to have you with me. So if you've never been here before, this is just a podcast where we read through one chapter every episode, and I give a little bit of context, a little bit of insight, a little bit of good times, so stick around. So if you remember last episode, we read Alma chapter 46, in which Moroni creates the title of liberty, which is amazing, because he's responding to Amalickiah, who is actually a Nephite, rising up wanting to be king of the Nephites. And if you remember, the Nephites haven't had a king in decades. It's been the system of judges since Mosiah died. And here Amalickiah is trying to break that pattern and trying to usurp power. And Captain Moroni's response was, well, let's gather the faithful and the defenders of liberty, let's make a title of liberty, and let's make a stand. And they do. And Amalickiah does manage to get away to the Lamanites, but they manage to get a lot of his followers to make a covenant of peace as opposed to fighting. So, there was good done last chapter. But at the end of last chapter, Amalickiah was still unaccounted for. He was still among the Lamanites for at least 8 years by the end of that chapter. And so now, this chapter, we're going to see what he's been doing among the Lamanites and how his plans are unfolding. So yeah, I think without further ado, let's read Alma chapter 47. By the way, before we start Alma chapter 47, I just wanted to say, I have the chapter 47 heading underlined in my notes, and I have written, in which Amalickiah steals the Lamanite king's life, kingdom, army, and wife. So that is what to look forward to in this chapter. Amalickiah steals everything from the Lamanite king, including his wife. So, anyways, Lamanite king is not going to end this chapter in a very good place. Now we will return in a record to Amalickiah, and those who had fled with him into the wilderness. For behold, he had taken those who went with him, and went up in the land of Nephi among the Lamanites, and did stir up the Lamanites to anger against the people of Nephi, insomuch that the king of the Lamanites sent a proclamation throughout all his land, among all his people, that they should gather themselves together again to go to battle against the Nephites. And it came to pass that when the proclamation had gone forth among them, they were exceedingly afraid. Yea, they feared to displease the king, and they also feared to go to battle against the Nephites, lest they should lose their lives. And it came to pass that they would not, or the more part of them would not, obey the commandments of the king. So this is interesting. Now we're getting this record that seems to be coming from inside the Lamanites, because we're hearing about what Amalickiah has been doing among them, and we're hearing that not only has he, as expected, made the Lamanite king bring the Lamanites to war against the Nephites again, but also, a lot, or maybe even all, of the Lamanites right now don't want to go to battle. The Lamanites, as they're usually characterized, are, by default, vicious and violent and hateful against the Nephites. But this little detail, that they don't want to go to war against the Nephites, shows that they aren't all black and white. The Book of Mormon, by virtue of being an abridged book, means that a lot of the nuance is kind of taken out, because it doesn't really matter for the stories that are told and the morals that are explained through those stories. And so the nuance isn't really important, but whenever it is there, I want to point it out because I do think that it is really interesting and important when the Lamanites act differently than we've been led to expect them to act. So, these Lamanites don't want to attack the Nephites. Why? Well, mostly because they don't want to die. So, to be fair, they aren't suddenly really righteous, they just don't want to die, which is valid. But that does go against their characterization that we usually get of them being violent and hateful to the point of throwing their own lives away to kill Nephites. So anyways, just wanted to point that out. Let's see where that goes. Let's see if they can hold their ground and not battle the Nephites. And now it came to pass that the king was wroth because of their disobedience. Therefore, he gave Amalickiah the command of that part of his army which was obedient unto his commands, and commanded him that he should go forth and compel them to arms. Now behold, this was the desire of Amalickiah, for he being a very subtle man to do evil, therefore he laid the plan in his heart to dethrone the king of the Lamanites. Sorry to pause so soon afterwards, but things are happening. So not only is there a group of the Lamanite army that will listen to their orders and will go to battle against the Nephites, but also Amalickiah has been put in charge of that part of the army and been told by the king to use it to, as it says in verse 3, compel the unobedient side of the army to battle. And I have a note here that says, Satan wants to compel us. If you've heard me talk about the war chapters before, you've heard my opinion that basically all the stories in the war chapters has a Satan figure and a righteous person figure. Usually it's one of the two armies that's Satan, and in this case, it's Amalickiah that is the Satan figure. And the Lamanite people that don't want to go to battle are kind of playing the righteous man figure. the righteous man that's trying to avoid the temptations of Satan. They're trying to avoid going to battle like Amalickiah wants. That's why I have a note on verse 3 that says, Satan wants to compel us, because Satan is represented by Amalickiah, and he has literally been sent to compel the people that don't want to battle. So, let's see how far Amalickiah will go to compel them. Additionally, in the very next verse, Amalickiah is characterized as a subtle man to do evil, which I really like that wording because it's very true, as you will see in this chapter. He plays the long game. But also, we learn Amalickiah plans to dethrone the king of the Lamanites himself. Right now, he's playing obedient. He talked to the king and got him to rev up the Lamanites against the Nephites, but that's not his endgame. He doesn't just want to fight the Nephites, he wants to take over the Lamanites. He has bigger ideas than the Lamanite king even knows right now. And right now, again, he's playing obedient. He's playing like, okay, I'll be the general of your army and I'll be satisfied with that. But we know Amalickiah, and we know that he is not satisfied by that, and he will not be until he steals the king's life, kingdom, and also wife. So anyways, let's see how his plans unfold, shall we? And now he had got command of those parts of the Lamanites who were in favor of the king, and he sought to gain favor of those who were not obedient. Therefore he went forward to the place which is called Onidah, for thither had all the Lamanites fled, for they discovered the army coming, and supposing that they were coming to destroy them, they fled to Onidah, to the place of arms. And they had appointed a man to be a king and a leader over them, being fixed in their minds with a determined resolution that they would not be subjected to go against the Nephites. And it came to pass that they had gathered themselves together upon the top of the mount, which is called Antipas, in preparation to battle. Now it was not Amalickiah's intention to give them battle according to the commandments of the king, but behold, it was his intention to gain favor with the armies of the Lamanites, that he might place himself at their head and dethrone the king and take possession of the kingdom. So, to briefly pause and sum up again, now this group of Lamanites that don't want to go to battle, they're chilling out, and they have made a determined resolution to not go to battle. They've all agreed, hey, we really, really don't want to go to battle. We are not going to let this happen. We are determined together as a group. And then Amalickiah comes on and he's like, hey, I've been assigned by the king to fight you, but I don't want to. I want you to join me so that we can dethrone the king together. Now, obviously he doesn't say that, but that is the intention that he comes with. He's already breaking from the orders of the king. So, bad things are happening. And it came to pass that he caused his army to pitch their tents in the valley which was near the Mount Antipas. And it came to pass that when it was night, he sent a secret embassy into the Mount Antipas, desiring that the leader of those who were upon the mount, whose name was Lehonti, that he should come down to the foot of the mount, for he desired to speak with him. And it came to pass that when Lehonti received the message, he durst not go down to the foot of the mount. And it came to pass that Amalickiah sent again the second time, desiring him to come down. And it came to pass that Lehonti would not, and he sent again the third time. And it came to pass that when Amalickiah found that he could not get Lehonti to come down off from the mount, he went up into the mount, nearly to Lehonti's camp. And he sent again the fourth time his message unto Lehonti, desiring that he would come down and that he would bring his guards with him. So, again, Amalickiah is the Satan figure, and now not only the group of Lamanites that don't want to battle, but Lehonti specifically is the righteous man that is trying to avoid his temptations. So, as we know, Lehonti and his group are at the top of a mountain, and they do not want to fight. And Amalickiah is at the bottom of the mountain, and he's trying to convince them to fight. So, that is the basic setup, right? So Amalickiah sends a messenger 3 times to ask Lehonti to come down and to talk with him. Lehonti, of course, says no, because he doesn't want to die, which is valid. But then the 4th time, Amalickiah does something really, really clever. He comes, as it says in verse 12, nearly to Lehonti's camp. And he says, hey Lehonti, you can come meet with me, and you can bring your guards. You don't have to leave your mountain, just come down a little bit. Just a little bit, to my camp. You can bring your guards, you'll be protected, you'll be safe, but just leave your camp a little bit. And I think that the lesson here is very clear. Satan does not often try to get us to commit murder. He doesn't immediately tempt us with the worst thing possible. Same as Amalickiah asking Lehonti to leave his mountain altogether. Lehonti won't do that because that's such a big leap, that's such a big change. But Satan does do things very, very slowly. He comes almost to us. He says, you don't have to do these horrible, awful things. You just have to do this one thing. make this one change. It'll be fine. Just do it once. Bring your guards, bring your friends, keep your guard up. You'll be fine. Just like a little bit, just once. And it's just like a little thing, you know? It's not a huge deal. You'll be fine. But as we know, Amalickiah eventually wins. And so what does that say about Lehonti's choice to go down? That it is a bad choice. So, Amalickiah is a very clever Satan figure. He makes the descent from Lehonti's determined resolution that he's fixed in his mind with really small. But he makes sure that it's still a descent. He still wants him to leave his home a little bit. He doesn't have to leave it very much, but he has to get his foot in the door. He has to start leaving. And that is enough for Amalickiah to get a hold on Lehonti, and we will see how he does that. And it came to pass that when Lehonti had come down with his guards to Amalickiah, that Amalickiah desired him to come down with his army in the night time, and surround those men in their camps over whom the king had given him command, that he would deliver them up into Lehonti's hands, if he would make him, Amalickiah, a second leader over the whole army. And it came to pass that Lehonti came down with his men and surrounded the men of Amalickiah, so that before they awoke at the dawn of day, they were surrounded by the armies of Lehonti. And it came to pass that when they saw that they were surrounded, they pled with Amalickiah that he would suffer them to fall in with their brethren, that they might not be destroyed. Now this was the very thing which Amalickiah desired. And it came to pass that he delivered his men, contrary to the commands of the king. Now this was the thing that Amalickiah desired, that he might accomplish his designs in dethroning the king. So, Amalickiah has made more progress. So by getting Lehonti to leave his army just a little bit, he was able to convince him to allow Amalickiah to be second in command. So they did a little thing where they tricked their own armies to have Amalickiah's army join Lehonti's army. So now Lehonti is in charge of the entire Lamanite army, and Amalickiah is second in command. So, if you're Lehonti, you think, oh perfect, I barely left my mountain, and now I have control over the entire Lamanite army, and now we don't have to go to battle. Amazing, this is great. But the thing is, he's allowing Amalickiah to be second in command. He's giving him power, he's giving him sway in his life, and that is ultimately his fatal mistake. Now, it was custom among the Lamanites, if their chief leader was killed, to appoint the second leader to be their chief leader. And it came to pass that Amalickiah caused that one of his servants should administer poison by degrees to Lehonti, that he died. Now, when Lehonti was dead, the Lamanites appointed Amalickiah to be their leader and their chief commander. And it came to pass that Amalickiah marched with his armies, for he had gained his desires, to the land of Nephi, to the city of Nephi, which was the chief city. And the king came out to meet him with his guards, for he supposed that Amalickiah had fulfilled his commands, and that Amalickiah had gathered together so great an army to go against the Nephites to battle. But behold, as the king came out to meet him, Amalickiah caused that his servants should go forth to meet the king, and they went and bowed themselves before the king, as if to reverence him because of his greatness. And it came to pass that the king put forth his hand to raise them, as was the custom with the Lamanites as a token of peace, which custom they had taken from the Nephites. And it came to pass that when he had raised the first from the ground, behold, he stabbed the king to the heart, and he fell to the earth. So, there are now 2 deaths at Amalickiah's hands. I'm sure there are more, but in this story there have been 2 deaths. And both of those deaths have something very, very important in common. The people that he killed did not see it coming. They completely trusted Amalickiah. Lehonti, who was chief over the armies of the Lamanites, trusted Amalickiah as his second in command. He allowed him to be close to him, and then he was poisoned by degrees, that is to say, slowly and subtly, by Amalickiah, which I think has its own importance in the way that Satan doesn't just pull us to hell immediately, but he rather drags us slowly, lower and lower. And the second killing, which is the king, again, Amalickiah didn't do it himself, but he did order it, was in a moment where the king trusted the servants that were bowing down in front of him to not murder him. They were bowing down as if to reverence him, it says, and when he was raising his arm to raise them back up, from their bow of reverence, he was stabbed. So, both of these people, Lehonti and the king, trusted the people that killed them. That means that Amalickiah, and therefore Satan, is very good at getting us to trust them, or getting us to trust things that aren't 100% true. And so we need to be very careful with keeping the spirit with us and being sure to let go of things that do not invite it and do not keep it around. because it is those things that, while they won't kill us, they will, you could say, I guess, poison us by degrees. And now, of course, this is a very severe story, right? There's a lot of deaths, and Amalickiah is trying everything he can possibly do to kill and dethrone the king to replace him. Now, this is all an allegory for our own lives, and while we aren't going to be killed by Satan, we are going to be tempted by him, and in a lot subtler ways than we're seeing here. And so this story, which is why I love it so much, shows the subtlety of Satan and how he gets close to us and gets us to trust him or his ideas very subtly. Sometimes the ideas are barely off center of what we should be believing, but it's there. And that is how Satan gets his foot in the door. And so this entire chapter, this entire story, is basically telling us to be careful and to keep the spirit with us. Now the servants of the king fled, and the servants of Amalickiah raised a cry, saying, "Behold, the servants of the king have stabbed him to the heart, and he has fallen, and they have fled. Behold, come and see." And it came to pass that Amalickiah commanded that his armies should march forth and see what had happened to the king. And when they had come to the spot and found the king lying in his gore, Amalickiah pretended to be wroth, and said, "Whosoever loved the king, let him go forth and pursue his servants, that they may be slain." And it came to pass that all they who loved the king, when they heard these words, came forth and pursued after the servants of the king. Now when the servants of the king saw an army pursuing after them, they were frightened again, and fled into the wilderness, and came over into the land of Zarahemla, and joined the people of Ammon. So I actually love what Amalickiah does after the king is killed. It's so clever. Like, obviously it's bad what he does, but it's so interesting and so clever how he does it, and we can learn a lot from it. So, firstly, he himself doesn't kill the king. He sends servants to do that for him. And secondly, those servants don't take credit for it. They immediately shift the blame, and the people that were running away afraid from the killing are now the perpetrators of the killing, aka the servants of the king that were afraid and ran away, and now are being chased by the people who, as it says in verse 27, loved the king. Because as soon as Amalickiah, quote-unquote, hears of what happens to the king, he immediately takes his entire army, which, by the way, is the entire army of the Lamanites, not just part of it, and he goes in and he says, "Whosoever loved the king, let us go forth and pursue his servants, that they may be slain." So here he's appealing to emotion. He's like, if you loved the king, you would chase his killers. And if you don't, that means you didn't really love the king. And it is that sort of appeal to emotion that is also something Satan uses a lot. In addition to the shifting of blame that happened immediately after the king's death, and the use of tragedy to rile people up to anger. That is something that Satan does, and it's so clear in this chapter, and it's fascinating, the inside look that we get into what Amalickiah was doing here. And the army which pursued after them returned, having pursued after them in vain, and thus Amalickiah, by his fraud, gained the hearts of the people. And it came to pass on the morrow he entered the city Nephi with his armies, and took possession of the city. And now it came to pass that the queen, when she had heard that the king was slain, for Amalickiah had sent an embassy to the queen informing her that the king had been slain by his servants, that he had pursued them with his army, but it was in vain, and they had made their escape. Therefore, when the queen had received this message, she sent unto Amalickiah, desiring him that he would spare the people of the city. And she also desired him that he should come in unto her. And she also desired him that he should bring witnesses with him to testify concerning the death of the king. And it came to pass that Amalickiah took the same servant who slew the king, and all those who were with him, and went in unto the queen, unto the place where she sat. And they all testified unto her that the king was slain by his own servants. And they said also, They have fled. Does not this testify against them? And thus they satisfied the queen concerning the death of the king. And it came to pass that Amalickiah sought the favor of the queen, and took her unto him to wife, and thus by his fraud, and by the assistance of his cunning servants, he obtained the kingdom. Yea, he was acknowledged king throughout all the land, among all the people of the Lamanites, who were composed of the Lamanites, and the Lemuelites, and the Ishmaelites, and all the dissenters from the Nephites, from the reign of Nephi down to the present time. Now these dissenters, having the same instruction and the same information of the Nephites, yea, having been instructed in the same knowledge of the Lord, nevertheless, it is strange to relate, not long after their dissensions, they became more hardened and impenitent, and more wild, wicked, and ferocious than the Lamanites, drinking in with the traditions of the Lamanites, giving way to indolence and all manner of lasciviousness, yea, entirely forgetting the Lord their God. I am in love with this chapter. I think that it is so fascinating and probably my very favorite war chapter story of all time, which is unfortunate because it's like the third chapter that is actually in the war chapters. So we have a lot to go, but this chapter is so good, mostly because it shows genuine subtlety and interesting sabotage by Amalickiah. He is one of my favorite characters in the Book of Mormon, not because he's a good example, but because he's a fascinating and interesting bad example. He started the chapter just by going to the king and being like, hey, the Nephites suck, we should kill them. And then he ends the chapter having killed Lehonti and having control over the entire army, having killed the king and gotten the entire city on his side, and having stolen the king's wife and becoming king himself by marrying her. Oh my gosh. This happened in one chapter. And throughout the chapter, there were so many people who trusted him. The queen, the king, Lehonti, and they were all screwed over. I guess you could argue the queen was fine, but still, she married someone who lied to her about the death of her own ex-husband, or I guess previous husband. Anyways, I kind of broke it down throughout the chapter, but he's so subtle, and it feels so real that these sorts of strategies could be used on us. And obviously not in the exact same way, like I'm not standing on the top of a mountain saying, I'm fixed in my mind with a determined resolution. But that is kind of what we're doing when we're living the standards of the gospel. We stand on our mountain and we say, we are not going to come down. I have decided this is the way I'm going to live my life. These are the commandments I'm going to follow. I am fixed in my mind with a determined resolution. And yet, Satan gets to us a lot more subtly than we think. Be so for real. If you were Lehonti, and the person that was trying to convince you to go to battle came right up to your camp and said, hey, just like, come next door, right? Bring your guards. You'll be fine. Dude, I would trust that. I would be like, yeah, I'll bring my guards. I'll convince him that we don't want to do this, and then I'll come back. It'll be fine. And then what happens to Lehonti? He dies. He's killed by poison by degrees by one of Amalickiah's servants. Oh my goodness. Amalickiah is power-hungry to a point that we haven't really seen before among the Lamanites. Usually when we get a power-hungry Lamanite, it's just a Lamanite general. But Amalickiah starts the chapter as a general, and he's still not satisfied. He still wants more. Oh my goodness, this is so cool. So the standout verse is going to be verse 18, which says, And it came to pass that Amalickiah caused that one of his servants should administer poison by degrees to Lehonti, that he died. I love this verse because it reminds me of 2 Nephi 28:21. It's the very same concept, and I'll read that verse really quickly. It basically says, And thus the devil cheateth their souls and leadeth them away carefully down to hell. So that is the phrase that I love so much. The devil leads us carefully down to hell, just as Lehonti was poisoned by degrees, and he left his camp just a little bit with his guards. He wasn't immediately tempted to go do a murder from being a perfectly righteous person. But he was tempted to just step his foot out the door. He was tempted to drink that first glass that he didn't know had any poison in it. And then he ends up dead. And I just love that phraseology, being led carefully down to hell. Because despite knowing that the devil is subtle, we think that we can recognize his temptations all the time on our own. And it is in fact usually only with the Spirit that we notice his more subtle things, which is, I think, Satan's most powerful tool, is his subtlety. And we need the Spirit with us so we can recognize those tiny, tiny things that we wouldn't notice on our own. Because again, wouldn't you leave your camp? That's a pretty good deal. Keep your guards with you, barely leave out your front door? Yeah, that's nothing. Oh, you take a glass from your second in command? Oh yeah, sure, I'll drink that. But then Lehonti ended up dead. And I think that the phrase, being led carefully down to hell, applies so much here. And it is kind of the central theme of this entire chapter, that Amalickiah led everybody, as you might say, carefully down to hell in this chapter. He was on top, everyone else was subject to him. All the Lamanites are now under his power and his control. And he, again, is a Nephite dissenter. And the last couple of verses of this chapter talk about how the Nephite dissenters among the Lamanites were so much more vicious and wild and hateful than any of the Lamanites ever were. So now, a vicious and wild and hateful Nephite dissenter is the Lamanite king. This is not great for the Nephites. Anyways, that was the chapter for today. I hope you enjoyed. Wow, This is what I was talking about when I talked about sabotage and drama and interest when I talk about the war chapters. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed, but there's just a few links down in the show notes that I want to mention. First one is a quick let me know you learned link, so if you want to shoot me a message and talk about something in the Book of Mormon, you can go ahead and do that there, or you can DM me on Instagram. Next, there are a handful of links to access a digital copy of the Book of Mormon, so if you don't have your own copy, you can go ahead and click those down below, and read along for yourself, find a good chapter, find a good verse, find even a good book that you want to read. But yeah, have fun. Next, there's a quick support the show link, so if you want to shoot me a few dollars and support what I do, that would be greatly appreciated. Next, we are on YouTube, so if you want to go subscribe to the YouTube channel, you can access the podcast there twice a week. And finally, we are on Instagram, so if you want to follow me where I'm the most active, you can go ahead and find me there. I post episode clips, standout verses, stuff on my story, trivia, etc. It's a good time, so yeah, find me there. But that's all I've got for you today. I'll talk to you later. Bye.